There's always the possibility of some ground attacks too, and ground incursions into Russia as well. So this is a particularly dangerous time, I think, in terms of the possibility of escalation.
Yesterday, we were all reporting this horrendous series of attacks, over 100 missiles sent from Russia into Ukraine, every single major city hit, huge collateral damage. But then we get this response from Ukraine, which the Russians are now complaining about.
Yes, it's quite extraordinary. The pot calling the kettle black would be an understatement, frankly, but it's clearly Ukrainian retaliation for the recent campaign against their cities and critical infrastructure over the last few days, more or less warning Russia that they don't have. There's no sort of immunity or impunity here, that they will be subject to retaliation, and they too will suffer consequences.
Do you get the impression that the Ukrainians, because they're backed into a corner and they know the clock is ticking on EU and American funding, they might be tempted to go further and strike deeper into Russia than the agreements they've struck with the US and others might dictate?
It's always possible. I wouldn't rule it out. They have struck Moscow with sort of low-level drone attacks. They've hit targets in Crimea too in recent weeks. So I wouldn't rule it out. And there's always the possibility of some ground attacks too, and ground incursions into Russia as well. So this is a particularly dangerous time, I think, in terms of the possibility of escalation.
And we're hearing a lot from our political leaders saying the world is a difficult and dangerous place. We've got Ukraine and Russia, and of course, we've got Israel, Hamas, and the wasteland that now is Gaza. How difficult is it to monitor all these terrible conflicts at any one time? Because that's what you do.
Yeah, we have a website called the Global Conflict Tracker, which we update every day. It monitors around 30 conflicts around the world, keeping track of what's going on. It's basically a one-stop shop for anybody who wants to get up to speed on any particular conflict. You can go to the council website and just tap in Global Conflict Tracker, and so if anybody who wants to, as I say, get up to speed on what's happening in any given conflict around the world, that's the place to go.
Yeah, because you get the impression that, that term walk and chew gum, our leaders, particularly here in the UK, perhaps in the US as well, can only focus on one or two at any one time, as if there is not a crisis going on in the north of Ethiopia, in Tigray, as if people aren't fleeing in huge numbers from Sudan, as if there's not pressure in Myanmar, as if there's not chaos in Mexico. One wonders how they prioritize. What do you think the rules are?
Well, but typically it's there's a sort of hierarchy that's at work here. When a conflict affects a critical region, a strategically valued region like Europe, then that's going to get a lot of attention. Israel is obviously a close partner of the United States and with long-standing commitments, so that's going to get a lot of attention. But as you say, there's the bandwidth for dealing with other conflicts is only so wide, and so many places in the world where a lot of people are dying at the moment, almost many more than frankly in Ukraine at the moment, like Sudan, where 15,000 people have died this year just in Sudan alone, maybe more. Millions have been displaced. Or you have Myanmar, formerly Burma, again, where millions have been displaced and thousands have been killed. And they barely get any attention in the world press because, as I say, the focus is on places which are seen to just be more important, certainly to US Western interest in general. So they're always going to get the attention, unfortunately. The UN and the various aid organizations, NGOs are sort of left picking up the pieces, if you will, to try to provide some humanitarian aid. But until the world's press really shines a light on some of these places, they're not going to get a lot of attention just because places like Ukraine, Gaza, elsewhere,
Mhm.
in Iraq and Iran too. Those places are always going to get more attention.
Well, if the agenda is dominated by those countries and those regions, both
Hmm.
in Washington and London,
Right.
Brussels, etc., then who is meant to take charge of what's going on in Sudan or in Ethiopia? Of course, you'd say the national governments, and if not the supranational entities like the African Union. How successfully are they bearing down on the hell that is being rained down on people in Sudan or in northern Ethiopia or indeed in Myanmar? What's going on beneath the radar?
Well, it's you look to the regional organizations first and foremost to try to bring some semblance of stability to these places. Try to offer mediation support in Myanmar. That's ASEAN. In the Horn of Africa, the regional organization there is quite weak.
Or is that IGAD?
Yes,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you've had some mediation efforts by the Saudis and the US to try to broker an agreement between the two warring leaders in Sudan, but they're just more or less sort of thumbing their nose at what's going on and doing as they wish, and you have sort of different external players sort of meddling here, trying to um, gain some local advantage. There's critical materials sometimes at work here. Um, in one sort of bright spot recently was the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there was some intervention by or mediation efforts by the U.S. to try to reduce the prospects of a larger conflict in eastern Congo that might draw in neighboring countries. And the
Well,
U.S. tried.
they've just had an election
They did.
about which the opposition leaders have been calling foul. They're trying to get people onto the streets of Kinshasa.
That's right, and this is the problem. And so, after several decades, when the U.S. and the West has intervened in some of these places with military force, the appetite for more of this is, as you would imagine, extremely low. So, and the warring parties know this, and
Yeah.
so the ability of external players to exert any kind of leverage is limited. Essentially, sort of economic embargoes, travel bans, things like that. Which, frankly, for those warlords on the ground, or that's not going to cut it with them. Frankly, it's going to require a much more committed, assertive, muscular even activity to try to bring some peace to some of these places.
Final thought, Paul, as we transition from 2023 to 2024, which are the conflicts that should be keeping, if not you, then the so called world leaders at the UN Security Council and beyond up at night, in 2024?
Yeah, well, we do this annual survey that asks that question. We're always worried about escalation in Ukraine. We're always worried about the possibility of US-China tensions growing and even outright conflict across the Taiwan Strait. There's an election in Taiwan coming up in a few weeks, and we're all watching that with great concern about how that will play out. Um, uh, there's also what we're hearing from our respondents to our survey, a lot of concern, frankly, about rising violence around the coming elections in the United States. Shocking that it may be, the US may be racked with a lot of violence in 2024. So that is one of the biggest concerns that we have at the moment. And it may not rise to the level of some of the conflicts we've been talking about, but in terms of the distraction and disruption on the United States, which, as you indicated, is one of the principal players in managing many of these global conflicts, you can't exaggerate what the implications of that will be. So that's also of great concern to us.